Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories, where we connect you with amazing people that help teens and adults with autism become more independent and successful. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Healthy relationships are vital to the existence of all of us, but can be challenging to find and nurture. In this episode, we discuss this with Tapia of the Regional Autism Advisory Council as she returns to Autism Stories to preview the Spectrum of Healthy Relationships and Sexuality in Autism Conference coming June 24th through the 26th to Cincinnati, Ohio. In this episode, we talk with Anne about 10 sessions you don't want to miss at the conference. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Anne, thanks so much for turning to the Autism Stories podcast. I guess I didn't scare you away the first time.
No, I'm so glad that you're having me back.
The reason I wanted to have you back is to talk about the spectrum of healthy relationships and sexuality in Autism Conference that's going to be happening in Cincinnati this June. Where did the concept for the conference come about?
So I have a lovely training committee who are phenomenal about keeping their ear to the ground in terms of need. And relationships and sexuality is a theme that it comes up with regularity for us. That there's just not enough resources, or the questions and the needs that arise are ones that, if only we did preventative work, we could have, prevented some issues from coming up. So we thought, let's just see what we could do to pull together some resources. And the amazing thing is, as we started talking about it, people were coming from out of the woodwork saying, I have some expertise in this area, or have you talked to so-and-so because they would be great for this. And we had far more resources than we had expected. So we're thrilled to have 3 days devoted to this topic.
Now, so many great topics that are going to be addressed within this conference. So I wanted to just pick out like 10 that I really thought that I was really excited about. I was excited about a lot more than 10, but we'd be
only 10.
we'd be talking for 24 hours. So this would be the longest podcast in history. So, but I wanted to start with our conversation by talking about 2 sessions from the same presenter, Sandra Williams. I have loved Sandra. Every time I've heard her talk, I've learned so much from her. And Sandra's first session is about females on the spectrum. Such a needed session because females can look so much differently than males on the spectrum, and that needs better understanding and awareness.
Yes, I agree completely. Sandra, on the one hand, Sandra is phenomenal. At every chance that I get, I want to hear from Sandra. She brings such unique perspective and insight to her own experiences with autism and professionally what she's been able to see and accomplish and support others in their growth, that I feel like she just brings such a richness and a depth to any of her presentations. And it's a passion of hers. It's something, as we have asked her to do this, she loves presenting and she loves giving others more resources and tools and ideas. So I feel really lucky that we get to have her as part of this. And it's going to be, it'll be phenomenal because she is phenomenal. The first one, females on the spectrum, we thought about exactly what you said, how often females on the spectrum just are misunderstood or will fly under the radar in terms of what their needs are and perhaps receive diagnoses that are not exactly what's going on for them. So this is our chance to really address how females on the spectrum may look a little bit different than males with autism. The other key piece that we are asking her to embed into her presentation is some of the kind of typical life cycle things that females experience no matter what, and how that is for someone who has autism. I've heard from a number of my friends with autism how they go into the doctor with a symptom or a complaint of something going on, and either it gets, brushed under the rug as, oh, that's just whatever, fill in the blank, or that's your autism, and that's not my specialty area, so maybe you should go see a therapist or a psychiatrist about that issue. And that's not fair, for one. It's not equitable. And we really need to be more mindful and growing in terms of our specialty areas about how we serve people with autism, especially around some of these very typical life experiences that we, as females, that all of us as females are going to go through. So I'm excited that Sandra's willing to speak to some of those kind of developmental milestones that we all either experience or can expect to experience over the course of our lives, and how that is for her having autism.
And the second session with Sandra is going to be about trauma. Again, something that's so important to be discussed, and something that we discussed the first time when you were on the podcast. People with autism so often have intense trauma in their lives, and we have to really figure out better strategies to support these people. I fear that as professionals, we oftentimes make matters worse, not better, when we don't deal with this piece.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is actually how I first met Sandra at a conference in which she was speaking on autism and trauma, and I sat in because of my own interest and my own experience in trauma work, and I just was captivated by her own experiences, which she shares in this presentation, and how as she grew up, she was institutionalized and had really significant, her autism impacted her really significantly. And so she had a number of experiences in which she was not treated as she should have been, and that those traumas that she's lived through, she can now speak to in such a way that she understands what was going on with her neurologically, how her brain was responding to these environmental triggers, and how that has stayed with her. And how sometimes it can be confusing as she gets triggered to kind of read through, is this a trauma response, or is this a symptom of autism? Is this something she's just getting overstimulated, and this is something that needs to be managed? But the fantastic thing that she emphasizes is that, the tools that she uses when she's overstimulated sensory-wise are the same things that help her to calm down if it's a trauma response. And then also the idea that she's able to work through the big T or little t, and that idea that sometimes our brains will misunderstand information that's coming in and will feel it as if it's a huge traumatic big T experience, when if we can take a step back from it, we realize that, well, yes, this is an issue and it's triggering. It's maybe not as big as it felt internally for us, and how we can kind of process through those crisis situations. She also does a great job of speaking to how, professionally, sometimes we go at behaviors and challenging situations. I'm using funny ears, you can't see that right now, but, our challenging behaviors professionally, we see that as a problem that needs to be corrected. However, many times, for people who've experienced trauma, it's far more about teaching how to be safe and how to understand that you are safe. And so it's a very small shift, but an important paradigm shift in how we're supporting people who've been through traumatic experiences, and how that can be really damaging if we aren't making that paradigm shift, because we can escalate situations really easily because we may not recognize what those triggers are or understand why a person is responding in such a large way, because it doesn't look like environmentally there's something that would have triggered that level of response, especially if it's been some kind of traumatic trigger that the person is experiencing. So she does a great job, and then the other piece that she really emphasizes is resiliency, which you and I had talked a bit about last time in the podcast, how that's really the most effective way to manage traumatic responses and trauma triggers, is to emphasize the resiliency that we all have within us, and that are our ways to boost our resiliency so that we can find success even in the midst of crisis or trauma. So I'm excited about her, too. We had got her to Cincinnati last April, and she was very popular in terms of speakers, and I think every single evaluation we had from that said, bring her back, we want more. So we're excited that she'll be back again speaking to that topic.
Yeah.
She's also part of our keynote panel. So the very first day, we have 5 self-advocates who will be opening with a question and answer period. And so she'll be part of that panel Q&A as well.
Now, I have a client who is an artist who recently worked with a local nonprofit here in Ohio to create a poster for a human and sex trafficking campaign. And I learned a lot through his work about how big of an issue human and sex trafficking is here in Ohio. I'm sure those with autism are certainly at risk for these types of situations, especially when you think about issues of self-advocacy, self-esteem, and overall the challenges in determining if someone is a safe person or not. That's why I'm really happy to see that there's a session at this conference that covers this very important topic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We in Ohio, unfortunately, our state is set up in such a way that those who are perpetrators, it's really easy for them to perpetrate. One with our highway system, where we've got 75 running north and south to all of our major cities, and then that we're a reunification state, and so the effort is always to try to get families back together, which is, on a whole, a good thing. When we're talking about perpetrators, the issue with that is that sometimes they will target a vulnerable parent, excuse me, either with drugs or with just abusive situations, and then will end up causing harm to the entire family, whether it's the adults in the family or the children in the family. And when it's in that kind of closed family unit, it's really hard to address. So the state of Ohio, unfortunately, we're hit really hard with human and sex trafficking. But on the disability side of it, it becomes even more compounding. The statistics are disgusting. They range quite a bit. Anywhere from 50 to 70% of individuals with disabilities have been abused, either physically or sexually. And those who have been abused, 90% of them have been abused 10 or more times. So it's gross. We have a major problem nationally, but in Ohio, unfortunately, we have some really high statistics of people who are in unhealthy situations. So Colleen Nuture Johnson is our presenter for this topic, and she's got a lot of experience and knowledge in supporting people with disabilities, and has a passion for really trying to help those who have been victimized or who are at risk of being victimized or exploited, to support them and try to prevent situations from either getting worse or from becoming, a negative statistic for us. So she will talk to us a bit about research and some of those high crime rates for us in the state of Ohio, but also nationally, and how that compares to those who are non-disabled. She's also will help us to identify what traffickers typically are looking for when they're trying to victimize people. So kind of giving us some eyes of what we should be aware of. And then knowledge about laws and resources to counter human trafficking. So there are some resources in our area and several task force areas who are really targeting this issue and doing some amazing work to try to prevent and reduce those individuals who are being trafficked. So, this is a really important topic, and I think really speaks to that safety issue that is huge for people with disabilities, that, it's it's unfortunate how easy it is for people to get themselves into that situation.
I always say that some topics in the autism community are either taboo or they're really sensitive to discuss, and as a result, there can be limited conversation about them. So one of those topics that I'm thankful that the Spectrum of Healthy Relationships and Sexuality and Autism Conference is addressing is masturbation. And studies really show that there are actually many health benefits to masturbation, but education is certainly important to make sure that this is done in an appropriate way.
That's right. So this is one of those developmental milestones that everybody experiences, right? Like we're all
Right.
going through puberty, and it is incredibly typical for children at a young age to begin to explore their genitals. And so when we have people with developmental disabilities, it turns into this tricky issue, but unnecessarily so, because it is a developmentally age-appropriate experience for all people. However, there are religious issues, there are personal issues, your own personal perspectives, there's medical, all kinds of societal stigmas that get brought into that. And so sometimes it just never gets discussed with people with disabilities. And so if that's the case, then, how are people learning what is and isn't appropriate if you have a disability and nobody's talked to you about the feelings that you're feeling within your body and what you're supposed to do with those feelings? So yes, Tori Schomer will be speaking to, I love the title of this one, it's called A Touchy Subject, from self-soothing to self-pleasuring. But really, getting down to masturbation as a complicated issue to address within the developmental disability community. So she'll speak to some of those personal values and professional expectations and societal stigmas that impact teaching sexuality to individuals with disabilities, as well as how masturbation really can be tied to sensory needs and what caregivers and educators can be doing to be supportive. And then, again, the medical, religious, and other limitations that can impact both the teaching and the learning about masturbation. I mean, it can be a variety of influences in terms of how a person both is taught and then also how they're taking that information in based on their own particular scenario. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a really important topic, and I'm thrilled that Tori's willing to speak to this and help others to think more broadly about how we're talking about masturbation with individuals with disabilities.
Absolutely. Now, I'm really thrilled that you're going to have a self-advocates session that discusses the intersection of LGBT issues and those that have autism. It really shows that this conference is truly trying to support all people with autism.
That's right. As we were pulling this conference together, we really were hoping to think about the entire spectrum, right? And so that often when we think about autism spectrum, we're thinking about how impacted a person is by autism, but as we're talking about healthy relationships and sexuality, the spectrum also includes all sorts of different sexuality expressions. So we were very intentional about making sure that we had incorporated LGBTQ plus issues within this conference. So I know you're probably not going to do your own shameless plug, but I'll do it for you. Doug will have a presentation speaking to this topic, partnering with Beth Thompson out of Milestone, and really trying to encourage from a professional perspective what considerations should be part of all professional relationships with those who are LGBTQ plus and have autism. And I think I love the framework of double rainbow, in which the rainbow is so symbolic within the LGBTQ community, but when we think about those who are LGBTQ and have autism in addition, that double rainbow I think is just such a beautiful way to represent that. couple different presentations that we have speaking to this. The Double Rainbow Part 1 is a self-advocate perspective. Raisin Kane, who is coming out of the West Virginia area, and Nathan Morgan will partner. Nathan is coming out of Milestones as well from the Cleveland area. So they'll partner together to really speak to their own personal experiences of what it's like to both identify as LGBTQ and having autism, what their experiences have looked like within dating and relationships, discrimination, when and how to self-disclose, and how they've built community around themselves and within both the autism community and the LGBTQ community, which are really two unique cultures that sometimes don't blend so well and aren't always as welcoming as you would expect. So they'll have some really good discussion, help people to think about their biases and misconceptions of LGBTQ people with autism. So it's really, I'm excited about this session, but then that we get a continuation with you and Beth, in which it's really that professional approach to serving this population. And so what is it that professionals should be thinking about when you're providing services and support, helping to think through what biases and, again, misperceptions we may be bringing into our relationships with people who are LGBTQ and have autism. And both Nathan and Raisin felt it was important to be in the room as you two present, and so they can offer some additional insight. So whether a person attended that part 1 or not, as you and Beth are presenting, they'll be able to kind of give that anecdotal experience, which often I find as a learner to be that application step for me. I can hear it as, okay, this is theory, this is what I should be doing, but as I hear the experiential level of it, that's when it kind of really sinks in for me to say, aha, now I know what I should be doing moving forward. So I'm thrilled that they're willing to support you too in that second part of the double rainbow.
Now, the next session I'm excited to talk about is forming and maintaining relationships. I often say over and over again that we all need community, and without community, our mental health is almost always worse. We get so much more anxious and depressed and all these negative things occurring. So I think like there can never be enough sessions at conferences to address this issue.
That's right. I mean, when it comes down to it, we know one of the key features of autism are social nuances being extremely confusing. So you're absolutely right. It is incredibly important that if we're thinking about relationships, that it really gets to the base level of how do you even begin to have a relationship with someone, and even on that friendship level is a challenge. So if we're thinking about moving it to that next step of a romantic relationship, how would you expect to get to that leap if we haven't gotten that friendship side of it? So yeah, it is incredibly important, and I think as we think about the issues that can really compound the ability to form and maintain relationships, there are so many layers to it. So I think it'll be a great session to really peel back all that gets involved in a person who is struggling to form relationships. So some of those mental health components that can impact a person as they're trying to form relationships too. And I feel like you should be plugging yourself again. Anything you want to add to this topic?
Well, I just think it's really a complex topic in the sense that there's a lot of executive functioning challenges that go into place regarding this. There's a lot of sensory issues. There's a lot of, past negative experiences that cause people to kind of withdraw from the community. So like with Autism Personal Coach, with our services, we kind of have to address all of these things to really develop a plan to help people develop community. And I also think whether it's with coaching services or maybe it's someone in there's the person support network, you have to have like feel like there's this safe person with you sometimes going into the community, initially to kind of like build those relationships. Otherwise it's going to be a much scarier place and less likely to take those first steps to developing more of a sense of community in each person's life.
I couldn't have said it better, which is why you get to speak to it.
Yes. Yeah. Now, a common expression that's said often throughout society is, if you don't love yourself, how can you love someone else? So it's great that Thomas Island will present a session like this at the Spectrum of Healthy Relationships and Sexuality and Autism Conference. I often see that the lack of love people have for themselves is really a big correlation between the lack of healthy relationships in their lives.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Tom has actually written a book. It's called Come to Life, Love Yourself. He's presenting a couple times. He'll be part of the keynote panel as well. And then one of his 2 breakout sessions, he'll have a presentation specifically to how you really first need to begin with you. When you think about relationships and you think about sexuality, you really need to know who you are and love who you are as a person individually. So he'll discuss what that looks like, a bit about having autism and understanding what that means, and how your understanding of what autism is for you can be a powerful resource and tool as you are developing relationships with others. And then he'll also speak to self-care and what it means as a different component to self-love. You can really understand and appreciate who you are and then miss out on some steps to take care of you. And so he'll speak to what the difference is between those. And then also how important it is to set boundaries for yourself when you are in relationships with other people, to really be able to maintain who you are as a person and to keep that authentic, genuine character of who you are. That way you don't lose yourself in someone else or someone else's needs or what they bring to the relationship. But yeah, I'm really excited that Tom is willing to speak to this. Tom, he's an author and keynote speaker. He's won a number of different awards and also has autism himself. So he'll be a really good, powerful speaker for us to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we could probably have a discussion about social media all day and how it can negatively impact those with autism and then really anyone in society. However, there are really a lot of positive benefits to social media as well, and the key is learning safely and effectively how to get those benefits. Having a session like this at the conference to address this, I think, is so important because it really starts with education.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think my own personal love-hate relationship with social media, but you can't get away from it at this point in today's society. It's everywhere, and being on social media is almost an unheard of thing. Most people have some connection to social media in one way or another. But you're absolutely right. There are important educational steps that we should all be taking, but especially when autism is a factor to be considering. There's some wonderful support groups and outlets for people to connect with one another in a way that is not as easy to do when you're face-to-face with one another, because the social media outlets really allow for a bit of some risk-taking that you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise, but can result in some really beautiful relationships and learning about other people in ways that you maybe wouldn't otherwise do in a face-to-face environment. However, it can also turn into some really risky things. Sometimes, to that same note, people are willing to say anything and everything on social media because it feels like there's this level of anonymity. So how do you keep yourself safe? How do you make sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation that's going to end up being harmful? So really thinking about what some of those risks and benefits are to social media and keeping your eyes open as you're utilizing it in terms of how to keep yourself away from some of the negativity that can exist in social media. The other key piece of that is, dating today is, it used to be that people wouldn't go to the bar to try to date, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's all social media is one of the main areas that people utilize as a way to meet people. So it's a really common tool for people, but again, there are some risks that can exist. And so how do you use the resources that exist in a way that's to your benefit and kind of recognize those limitations that can exist as well? I was going to plug who's doing this. I realized I didn't say yet. So TJ Nassidi, he's coming out of Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services. He's a psychologist there and has a ton of experience. He's one of our Cincinnati local speakers who will present on healthy relationships and sexuality within disabilities. So we're excited to have him as part of this conference and that he's willing to speak to the social media topic.
Now, the last session I wanted to talk about was a session that at least I think is pretty unique to conferences. I haven't seen it in a conference that I've been to previously, and it's a person, parent, and professional perspectives panel discussion, which will be, I believe, on the last day of the Spectrum of Healthy Relationships and Sexuality and Autism Conference. Could you explain more about the purpose of this session for those that may not be aware of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we decided for our third day of the conference, we will do our keynote session a little bit different. So the first keynote is the person, parent, and professional perspective panel discussion. Amanda Tipkemper out of Children's Home of Cincinnati will be facilitating that panel discussion on this one. It'll be with a person who is significantly impacted by their autism and their team. So Dr. Renee Sorensen is a psychologist out of Cincinnati Children's, and she has a team that will join her. So she'll speak to that clinical perspective of how she has identified, they'll take a topic, an issue that the person has experienced in their life, and then each of them will have a chance to kind of speak to what that experience was like for them from their various vantage points. So that clinical perspective, the personal perspective, the family perspective, and how, that one particular issue can really be navigated in very different ways depending on where you're sitting within the team. So it'll be kind of a perspective-taking opportunity as well as a chance to kind of think through and rehash, hindsight is always 20/20. So if you knew what you know at the end from the beginning, you would absolutely do things differently. But in this kind of perspective-taking, we're really giving people the chance to think about, okay, what are the missing links in terms of communication and what are the roles and kind of boundaries that each person lives with, whether intentional or unintentional, and how do you think about that as you're navigating your own life issues? How can you learn from what somebody else has gone through and those various team members and team players so that you can think about your own team and the other aspects of teams that you live in to better support people as they navigate some of the life issues that they go through. Mm-hmm. So that morning one will be somebody who is more impacted by autism, but then we're doing a second keynote option, which will be in the afternoon. And I'll tell you, I struggled so hard with coming up with these titles that would fit, but also capture what we're trying to get to. So really the second afternoon session is navigating life issues with bunny ears, high-functioning autism, another panel discussion. Really somebody who's not as impacted by their autism. However, what does that really mean, right? What does high-functioning really mean? And so we really got into these philosophical conversations around how best to frame this. But we have an adult with autism who will speak to her own experiences and how even though she may present in such a way that she can articulate and she can verbalize her life experiences, it doesn't mean that she doesn't struggle quite a bit. So her husband will be part of this panel discussion as well as her therapist. and then this one will be facilitated by Kay Brown, and they'll talk a bit about what life looks like on the other side of the spectrum, and how, as again, from a team perspective, an issue or two can look very different from various vantage points, and how each person helped and supported, how they collaborated with one another, how they communicated with each other, and then, again, what would they have done different, and how could they have worked together, understanding each other's various perspectives. So yeah, it is kind of unique in terms of doing this kind of perspective taking, and from two different angles of what autism can look like.
Mm-hmm. Now, if someone's excited after hearing our podcast up to this point, and they want to, yeah, of course, right, yeah, and they like, now I need to register for the conference. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so the easiest way to go is to the Eventbrite website. Eventbrite is EVENTBRITE.com, and if you plug into the search RAAC, RAAC 2019 relationships hyphen sexuality, and that'll take you to this conference. So I'll give you the full link if anybody wants to go directly there. It's https://RAAC 2019 relationships sexuality.eventbrite.com. And I hope lots of people are excited about this. We are thrilled. I think our Cincinnati area, there's just been a whole lot of buzz and energy from people who keep telling me, this is fantastic that we have 3 whole days talking about this topic. Often it's like 1 hour, and
right.
Trying to cover all of these things, and you can't. You really can't go into the depth that is really needed for this kind of discussion and this kind of topic. So we're super excited that we're going to have 3 days to really go into a much deeper conversation about how we support people with disabilities to have the most healthy lives that they can. I think relationships are key to all of us. We are social people by nature, so we can't get away from that. And having autism does not mean that you no longer want relationships or you no longer express yourself sexually. Some nuances that we need to think about. So how do we best support people to be in the healthiest place that they can? So I'm psyched. I think it's going to be a fantastic conference. I know I'm biased, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I add one thing? One of my frequently asked questions that I've been getting, we are really encouraging self-advocates and individuals with autism to come to this conference themselves. So I've had a number of people who have asked me from that caregiver perspective, my child is, 15, 16, 17, whatever the age, do you think they would be appropriate to come to this conference? And it's a really hard question because my feeling is I don't know. I would love to say yes, absolutely, they should be at this conference, and that is my own personal feeling. But I think what's really important to consider is that we are talking about sex, and we are talking about some explicit, components of relationships and sexuality. So I think each person really needs to consider that and how well those topics and those conversations will be managed. So what can you be doing ahead of time before the conference? What can you be doing during the conference? So we will have 2 intentional spaces, thanks to Doug, your genius idea. We'll have one space that is designated to desem, calm down, quiet. We'll have some fidget toys and try to be mindful of how that space is set up in terms of sensory needs. And then another space where if you hear something and you just want to talk more about it, it's just really exciting and you hadn't thought of that, or it was said in such a way that's just getting you thinking about other things, it's an intentional networking space and brainstorming and continuing the conversation. So, utilizing those spaces, as well as what support supports might be necessary to really be successful in that conference, whether you're going for a single day or for all 3 days. And then the other piece that I've been saying is, what do you need to do after, right? So there's probably going to need to be some good debrief conversations about, what are you learning and what are you hearing? And I think this goes for all of us. I know I need that when I go to a conference, to kind of sit down and really chew on the things that I've said, or that I've learned, but then somebody who's on the spectrum who maybe is hearing some brand new information that they've never heard before, or is just feeling supported in a way that they've never felt supported, and ready to talk about things that they've been thinking about. So giving some room and some intentional space for allowing this to be successful. And I think if those components are in place, yes, come. I don't care if you're 15, if you're 22, I think just be mindful of what it takes to be successful in something like this. Mm-hmm. So yeah. And then otherwise, I really hope that people who are embarrassed about this topic are in the room, because the more we can talk about it, the more likely we're going to be supporting people into healthier places. And if we're embarrassed about talking about it, then we're unintentionally setting people up for some really negative situations, because if they don't know and they don't have a place to talk about some of the questions or concerns that they have that are going on with their body or with relationships with others, then it can really go bad very quickly. And so I am very hopeful that we're getting a good, broad, diverse audience in terms of where they are and their understanding of relationships and sexuality for people with autism, and that it turns into some really healthy discussions for people. And my last caveat that I want to throw in here is that we are going to be speaking from the autism lens. That's kind of the perspective that we've framed this around, but it is absolutely applicable to the greater disability community. So I think if there is any question about, I have a different disability beyond autism, should I go? Yes, you should definitely go. Just kind of understand that a lot of the speakers will be talking from that autism perspective. So how do you apply that to your own experience of disability? Mm-hmm. So, thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Anne.
Conversation issues, keeping it short, even with practice, we still struggle to having a relationship with someone we like, talking to people doesn't last that long, going on outings, sometimes alone, sure is upsetting, but I'm sure we're fine, talking to our friends, can have some issues, constantly asking the same questions to them. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you with ASD.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you as always to Anne Tapia. I'm always excited to go to Cincinnati, but especially this time around for the Spectrum of Healthy Relationships and Sexuality and Autism Conference, June 24th through the 26th. I look forward to learning at many of the sessions we talked about today and bringing this information back to share with my coaches at Autism Personal Coach. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach saves people with autism from feeling alone and being isolated? So often, teens and adults with autism struggle with anxiety and as a result don't have success in their lives. Autism Personal Coach is a unique service in that we help those with autism by working on meaningful, individualized goals in the setting in which they will be used so their anxiety is greatly reduced, and as a result they can become more independent and successful. To get an autism coach for a loved one or yourself, it's very easy. All you have to do is email autismpersonalcoach@yahoo.com or call 216-336-5889 and request a coach today. On next week's episode of Autism Stories, we will talk with Jason Gepworth, who is a disability and STEM resource specialist at Wright State University. Talk to you then.